Eve, is that you that's helping us out on that front? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Give me a thumbs up when you feel like we're ready, okay? Okay, I'll call this meeting to order, the Joint Judiciary Committee. It's good to be back in Douglas. It feels like I've had 3 or 4 meetings here in Douglas this interim, but would you please call roll? Is that, thank you. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call for the Joint Judiciary Committee for November 6th. Senator Case.
Present.
Senator Cooper.
Here.
Senator Furphy.
Here.
Senator Schuler.
Here.
Representative Chestek.
Here.
Representative Crago. Representative Haroldson.
Here.
Representative Jennings. Representative Nemec.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Here.
Co-Chairman Washut.
Here.
Chairman Landon.
Here.
All are present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Just a couple of reminders to the committee and to those joining us today here in Douglas, those streaming online. We do expect decorum at our legislative meetings. That means professionalism and civility. And so we'll remind ourselves as we go through the next couple of days that we're here to do the good work of Wyoming and take good care of each other in the process. It feels good to be back with the Joint Committee. Some of the best people I know are sitting right up here. So I like the agenda. I think we've got some things that we will cover that I think it's interesting, have literally appeared on the national news lines just over the last couple of days. So I think that means that we are considering the appropriate sorts of things today. Mr. Co-Chairman, any thoughts from your front?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Delighted to be in Douglas. This is the first time I've had a interim meeting in Douglas in my time in the legislature, so I'm delighted to be here. Look forward to a productive meeting today. I just thinking back of our first meeting in April back in Sheridan and how many topics we've wrestled with, and that several of them are going to make it to the finish line hopefully today, and be good to wrap up this interim. It's been a pleasure to work with you this interim, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Well, hopefully the next 2 days won't dim that notion, and we'll get started. Brian, I understand that we've got somebody new that maybe you could introduce a new staff member.
Yep, certainly, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Eve Hamilton is our newest LSO employee. She is a legislative editor. She is a native of Pennsylvania, a graduate of Wyoming Catholic College, and worked in journalism before joining us at LSO about a month ago.
Well, how about that? Eve, thank you and welcome to a fellow journalist. All good things come out of the journalism department, so we look forward to working with you. Committee, let's go ahead and get started. As I said, we've got some bills. I think we've got a good agenda that allows us some time to work these bills and get them in shape. If we choose to forward them, let's make sure they're in good shape and ready to go. Law enforcement issues, unsolved murders. We have consideration of a couple of bill drafts. LSO 0047 and LSO 059, cold case database and cold case investigations. Brian, would you be willing to, or Katie, one of you can walk us through these?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Katie Adams, LSO, I'll walk through 0047, the cold case database. So you'll recall at the last meeting, we amended the definition of cold case that's on page 2 of the bill draft. So essentially, this bill requires the division to develop and maintain a cold case database. It defines cold case. It requires the division to adopt rules specifying the information for each cold case that will be included in the database. It requires law enforcement agencies in the state that have cold cases to provide information to the division as specified. And then section 2 requires the Attorney General to promulgate rules regarding the database. It requires a report. And then on the final page of the bill, there's an appropriation, and the appropriation is left blank for the committee to consider an appropriation at this meeting.
Okay, committee, any questions for Katie? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Katie, it looked to me that there were two places where we talked about rules. In one place, the division is promulgating rules. And then in another place, the Attorney General is promulgating the rules. Is there a conflict there?
Katie, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe so. I believe the division works with the Attorney General's office on those rules. And it's all part of the same office. And the one that's in the statute is requiring the division. And then the uncodified section refers to the Attorney General. But you could say that if you wanted to, you could amend it to say the division, but I think it's really the same thing.
Okay, any further? Representative Jennings, good morning. All the way from Sheridan County.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to ask on page 4, do we have a number for the X's? Seems like there's been plenty of time to figure out what this cost.
Katie, go ahead and I'll let you answer, and then maybe we'll fill in as well.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, so DCI provided some information to the committee. And so for the cold case database, the estimates were approximately 150,000 and then 5% yearly for maintenance, which I believe is about 7,500 a year.
And Representative, we do have materials, as you know, in our stack. I thought we look forward to hearing from a couple of our agency folks this morning. Hopefully they can shed even more light on it, but we can delve into that. Hope that's helpful. Okay. And frankly, I'm looking at Brian, and this might be a time for us to consider this, Brian. I wonder if you've been able to look over the document that Katie referenced. I struggled a little bit with it. I don't know if the committee did too. I had trouble getting my arms around exactly what was being said. We were talking bienniums and yearly, and have you been able to analyze that, Brian? Any thoughts that you can give us on that list?
Mr. Chairman, as it pertains to this bill, to 24 LSO 47, my colleague, Ms. Adams, I think covered that piece of it. It looks like it would be $150,000 for that appropriation, should the committee wish. For 24 LSO 59, Mr. Chairman, I have what I would call kind of back of napkin math, calculations for the two blanks, or as best as I can figure them, the two blanks that were in that bill draft for appropriations. For the two positions that are authorized, my rough estimate would be $672,500. For the second appropriation, $202,800. And that second number would be for funding cold case investigators paying retired peace officers to serve as cold case investigators.
So thank you, Brian, and I appreciate you jumping over to LSO 59 because we have considerations on both fronts. So about 150,000 would be a good placeholder, Representative, for the cold case database, and then obviously quite a bit more investment if we want to look at cold case investigations. And so anything else on 47, committee? Any questions? So Katie or Brian, could you go ahead and take us through 59 then, the cold case investigations? And Appreciate that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 24 LSO 59. This is draft 0.62-02 in the online meeting materials. This is a bill the committee considered in September. Consideration was continued to this meeting. There were no amendments made or adopted to the bill. So the substance is the same as it was in September. This bill draft authorizes DCI to allow retired peace officers to assist with cold case investigations under specified conditions. It authorizes 2 full-time equivalent positions for DCI for cold case investigations and appropriates funds for both options. I'll walk through the bill quickly, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, the definition of cold case that's on line 6 is the definition that was initially drafted in the bill and that the committee looked at in September. The staff comment, though, on page 2, the committee in 24 LSO 47 adopted a different definition of cold case, a felony or felony sexual offense or a homicide unsolved for 1 year. And so the consideration here would be whether those should be identical between the 2 bill drafts. And if so, the definition of the staff comment would need to be adopted to align that to what's in 24 LSO 47. Then, Mr. Chairman, I'll move on to page 4, beginning with line 21. This is the beginning of the language that concerns the investigation of cold cases. And DCI is required to investigate cold cases that are referred by the Attorney General and may investigate cold cases that are referred to the division by local law enforcement agencies. Then on page 5, it provides the requirements and standards for doing that. DCI may utilize the services of retired peace officers to assist in cold cases. Retired peace officers are not considered agents for purposes of this bill draft. And there are various statutes that provide limitations and requirements for agents to follow. These officers would not be subject to those requirements. One example is a requirement not to participate in partisan politics. That's 91620. So they would be, by saying they are not agents, they would not have to comply with that requirement. Retired peace officers, in order to provide assistance, must be a peace officer who retired in good standing with their agency or received a retired ID card from the Post Commission. They cannot have been or be decertified as a peace officer. They must have at least 5 years of criminal investigative experience. They must consent to and pass a background check and a drug screening. They must sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the information obtained while investigating cold cases. And then they may be volunteers or may be compensated for their assistance, subject to available funds. The staff comment on page 6 just notes some considerations. The first would be, as the bill is drafted, DCI must investigate if the Attorney General refers. They may investigate if a local agency refers. Questions about compensation for retired peace officers, whether they should or should not be. If so, whether there should be a maximum amount or a minimum hour requirement to be compensated. And if there's a maximum number of officers who should be authorized to be able to investigate these cold cases. Then moving on to page 7, line 4, retired peace officers who assist must be supervised by the director or an agent of DCI. Page 7, line 8, and this was subject to discussion in September, retired peace officers who assist with investigations are immune from civil liability for any official act that's performed in good faith. If DCI declines to investigate a case that a local law enforcement agency has requested assistance on, DCI must provide the local agency with a written explanation for its decision, and then the division shall pursue any federal funding available to use in investigating cold cases. Page 7, line 23 is the authorization for 2 positions for the next fiscal biennium. Page 8, line 9, this is the appropriation for those 2 positions, currently blank. And then page 9, line 1 is the appropriation for the retired peace officers, and that's also blank. With that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Brian. Nice job on that. Committee, any questions for Mr. Fuller? Everybody up to speed on that one? So I had a question, Brian, and it's regarding if a peace officer is retired and chooses to go to work, I wonder if that's not self-governing. I appreciate the staff comment with regard to what we need to pay these people, but I would think that there's going to be some limits if they want to benefit from whatever retirement system is in place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I definitely can't speak to specifics, but I know that, for example, upon receipt of Social Security, there's certain earning limits that it may impact that. I'm not as certain how that would impact, say, a member of the law enforcement retirement plan, and whether any earnings would impact that. I don't have a good answer for you there, Mr. Chairman.
I'm just not sure. Thanks, Brian. I was just thinking out loud with the committee that might be self-governing. We might not really need to put a plateau there, but anyway, anything further on this bill before we go to some agency comment? Okay. Let's anyone from Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, let's start with you guys first. We'd love to hear any thoughts you have about either one of these bills. And I know that we'd like to visit a little more carefully so that we understand the information that was provided. We appreciate that, but we also want to make sure we understand it. So welcome and thanks for being here. If you'd introduce yourselves for the record, we'd sure appreciate that.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and legislatures. My name is Kelsey Singleton. I'm with the Wyoming Attorney General's Office, and I represent the Division of Criminal Investigation. And I'm starting to come down with a cold, so I'm hopefully not going to talk too much and leave it to the experts, but I absolutely answer any questions. But I'll let
Ms. Singleton, sometimes that gives you a broadcast voice,
I too am coming down with a cold this morning, but Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, maybe, we were glad to see you before you sat down. Go ahead. No.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thanks for having us here. My name is Ronnie Jones and I'm the director of DCI.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Ryan Cox. I'm a commander with the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation.
Well, take it away, folks. Tell us thoughts, concerns, encouragements on 47 and 59. Try to delineate for us if you would. Let's maybe take up 47 first, the cold case database.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've done quite a bit of research since the last meeting on what a cold case database would look like. We've found that there's not a lot of options to just buy a database off the shelf. With our missing persons database, that's something we've created internally. We're not paying for that. Depending on what this database looks like, we may be able to do that on our own, or we may not be able to. We're just not sure. Some of the numbers that we found as we were researching cold case database, the price of this product ranges greatly. One quote we got, the quote we provided in the documents was the first one we got, and that was $150,000, and that would be for them to create a database. That would be the purchase price, and then there would be a 5% maintenance fee per year to maintain that database. But the second quote we got was $276,500 to purchase. They would have to create it again, and then it would be an $84,000 annual maintenance fee. And the third one was $75,000 for the product and $25,000 for a yearly maintenance fee. So it's going to be expensive either way. Commander Cox is very good at database management. He's the one that created our current missing persons database that's online. You know, if that's something that would work, I think that would be obviously the cheapest option. But again, we don't know if that will be sufficient enough to achieve the goals of the bill. The other thing we learned while we were researching this is there's several surrounding states who currently have cold case databases. And what we learned from them is that it takes a full-time position to manage that database. Now, those are bigger states, more people and more cold cases than we have. So if that's the reality for us, we don't know at this point in time how much time it's going to take for one person to manage the cold case database. But that's, you know, that's something that we learned as we were doing research. I did speak with Director Thompson from WASCOPS about any input from chiefs and sheriffs around the state. I don't want to speak for him, but it was his understanding, or at least up to this point, he's not received negative feedback on the impact of this bill for local agencies to participate or at least their position on it. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a good idea. I think it would help keep cold cases from becoming even colder because they are forgotten. So those are my thoughts as far as draft bill 47.
Mr. Jones, the last point you made might have answered one of the first questions you would have gotten really from the committee, and that is, are we on track to do something good for Wyoming here and something good for your operation? I mean, that's what the committee is up to see what can we do to help you guys do your jobs better. And so appreciate that. Committee, anything for the director? Senator Furphy.
Yeah, you mentioned it, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned it, but I'm curious, other states that have used this database, have they really solved many of the cold crimes by using it? My point is, that's a lot of money to spend. And are we going to get results from doing this? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, that's Commander Cox may have some insight into whether there's been success stories or not. I'm not sure. That's a very difficult question to answer. I do think what we will find, not only at DCI, but statewide, is two things. Number one, these cold cases will remain on the radar. There will be a level of accountability for law enforcement when those cases are made available and questions are asked, what's going on with this case. So I do see that as a benefit. The other thing that I'm certain we will see are investigative leads come from a database like this. And it could be as simple as somebody in Utah looking at our cold case database and being able to look at one of their open cases and say, oh, I think there might be a connection here. I'm at least going to reach out and talk to the investigator and see. But it's a very difficult question to answer as to, are we going to see additional solved cases? That's a difficult question to answer. Commander Cox, do you have anything to add?
Go ahead, Commander.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you. From my work in cold cases, I believe the databases do add value, both to the public and to members of law enforcement. The database that we are looking at or developing is essentially derived from a spreadsheet that we currently have internally. And those are the fields that we're presenting. And right now it's nearly 100 fields of different data that we're looking to collect from local agencies. Some of those are pretty minute fields, just yes and no. Some of them are a little bit more complicated. The idea being, though, that when law enforcement has access to their neighboring jurisdictions, criteria, or I guess crime MO, their locations, the time, that they'll be able to build those connections along with citizens. Law enforcement would, the way we're presenting it to the companies that are proposing the database product, is law enforcement would have a more expansive view of the data. Some of that would be data that would frankly be shocking to the public and not productive, where the public would have a more limited view of the data that would be represented onto a web page, and they would be able to also make those connections. They just wouldn't have some of those details that would be shocking to the public. All that being said, is all the states are considering doing this, and I believe they are doing that because they have also found that there's value in putting this information out to the public and then sharing it across jurisdictions. Even though we've come a long way in law enforcement, we still suffer from some of those issues of not sharing information with the neighboring jurisdiction that could help solve crimes. And these cases being on the top of the list of cases that we could share more information and potentially get leads.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Do we know roughly how many cold cases there are? I mean, is it 1,000? Is it
Senator Cox?
500?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, no, for the state of Wyoming, based upon UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting Statistics, going back to 1965, and looking at our solved cases versus our reported cases, and I'm talking specifically, I should clarify this right away, I'm talking specifically homicides.
Mhm.
So we're also considering in different versions of our two bills, missing persons that are longstanding missing persons, sexual assaults, so that I'm not considering those, and unidentified human remains. So I'm not considering those unless it was an apparent homicide upon the discovery of that body. So your answer is 150 is approximately how many homicide cases that we are looking at.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Thanks. So I'm trying to get my head around 150 and then maybe spending $75,000 for a database about 150 unique situations. That sounds pretty pricey to me. And, it's several $1,000s per record, if you want to call the record. And I don't know, just Mr. Chairman, I think you were involved with the LSO when we decided to do some major IT work in-house with our bill drafting system. And we saved a lot of money and made it work a little better. But I'm not sure what this database really does. And I understand that people can log into it. There would be different levels of access for the public and law enforcement. But if it basically takes all the old files and images them and makes them available broadly, then I think we could learn a lot from our archivists at the state library and what they do and how they preserve and characterize material. A lot of case information that would be visual, it doesn't seem to fit in a Lotus spreadsheet, or Lotus, that dates me, sorry about that, in an Excel spreadsheet. even with, 100 columns. It's not, it's more qualitative and images and links. And I'm just wondering if we really know what we're doing here and what this would look like. And it might be better to pilot it a little bit with smaller resources than get locked into a $75,000 initial fee. And then you have a maintenance fee on top of that every year for as long as you use it. For right now, 150 homicide cases. And let's say it's 1,000. It's still really pricey.
Good thought, Senator Case. And that's really, it really comes down to that, doesn't it, for our joint committee? I think that we've moved it this far with the help of DCI. Thanks to all of you. It's a legitimate policy consideration that we have in front of us. And what are we willing to invest in something like that? And so go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Senator Case actually asked one of the questions that I was going to ask, which was the numbers. But secondly, I'm kind of wondering, you said you might be able to create a database in-house, you might not. I'm just kind of wondering, if we had to go with the canned, buy it from someone, another state or whatever, I would be a little more reticent. But why couldn't you create your own? If you can for the missing folks, why couldn't we do that for the cold cases?
Commander Cox.
Thank you, Senator. We did do this for our missing person database, which is displayed on our public webpage if you've had a chance to see it. And we've modified that just recently. So part of the issue is we had a employee or two employees that populate a spreadsheet consistently with missing persons, We built the viewer for that spreadsheet to display publicly, and the fields are much more limited, or there's not nearly as many fields in that missing person database as there would be in what we believe would be a comprehensive and useful cold case database. We have that option to use to build that, but it takes manpower, and we have no employee that's currently running that internal spreadsheet, such as we do for missing persons. Like I said, we have two people that are running that spreadsheet. So when we're essentially looking at, do we spend our man hours doing this, or do we hire a company to do this? Either way, it's an expenditure. And I do have confidence that we could use that viewer. It's created by Google. We obviously run off of the Google platform. So I have confidence that we could do that with time and man hours. The problems that we do foresee down the road, as with any Google product, they could choose to eliminate that product at any time. And then we would be scrambling to figure out what we're going to do. And it would be completely out of our control. I feel it's a little unlike Microsoft Excel that we've all seen for years and years, or maybe Lotus. But because I have seen Google just terminate programs at their whim, and they give you generally about a year to move your product over into something else. That would be one of my largest concerns.
Further questions? Representative Jennings, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the money was one that concerned me in this, and I agree with the senators that have gone down that road a little bit. But I have a question for you on page 2, and I think I probably should have directed this to Mr. Fuller, but I hadn't found it at that time. But I'm curious of the agency's view of this on line 15, and really the entire paragraph. If we're going to do this and we're looking at a cold case database, it seems to me like the definition would be very important. And so on line 15, it says, that's where it's starting, that has no viable. So we would have to define what that looks like. and then we put and I'm wondering if we shouldn't have or there. Because the way it's written, it seems like you'd have to do both. You'd both have to have both in place. And so in the definition, I think if we're gonna move forward, we might want to think about that a little bit. Could you give a little more definition to what no viable would mean?
Representative, can you help me real quickly to locate that again, please? It's on page 2.
Page 2, line 15.
Oh, first bill.
Yeah, 47.
That's where I was
Mr.
going
Chairman.
wrong. Thank you very much. Okay. So any thoughts in that regard, Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, it's interesting you bring this up because Commander Cox and I were talking about this very sentence before the hearing started. And he shared not the same concern, but similar concern. I'm looking at his notes here, but one of the things that he penciled in here was not been accepted for prosecution. So our discussion centered around if this were to remain the same, would we be able to promulgate our rules to address the criteria and what this stuff means when agencies are submitting the information to us for entry into the database? Because I do think no viable and unexplored investigatory lead, I think that is subjective. I can see potentially some agencies saying, well, I don't have to submit because we still have viable leads or we have unexplored investigatory leads, but we just haven't had time to go down that road yet. So I agree that it would be beneficial for that to be cleaned up a little bit.
So Representative, I hope you've got a note on that one, and if and when we work the bill, that was a good job of picking that up. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you,
Harrelson.
Mr. Chairman. So real quick question. I know you guys said 1966. Is that the line that we would be drawing as far as we're talking about these cold cases? Because the reality is, if we're being 100% honest, obviously we would love every single thing to be uncovered, exposed, figured out, prosecuted. And I mean, that's in the perfect world, everyone would love that. But there's also a point where if the individual that committed the crime is no longer living, yeah, we could answer a question, but it's not like justice could be brought. And so I question where's the line that we're going to draw? Are we going to be pulling up cold cases from 1915? Or do we have a line that we've drawn on what we're actually going to be looking at putting into the database to pursue trying to find a solution or an answer to? Director.
Chairman Landon, Representative Harrelson, I think that we or maybe the committee would need to draw a line, say, here's our start date, any cold case from this point forward, just so we have somewhere to start. Because the reality of this is every agency in this state has boxes of case files sitting in their basement that haven't been looked at in 10, 20, maybe 30 years. And there's likely a number of cold cases in those boxes that nobody at that respective department even knows exist because they've been cold for that long. So I think it would be prudent to set a time frame. And to me, UCR data makes sense because it's something that we can hang our hat on. Now, I don't think we would necessarily want to preclude any agency from entering in a cold case from the 1940s or the 1950s if they feel like that's important. But I do think there needs to be a hard date, at least for our benefit, to say, okay, chiefs and sheriffs, here's the date that we need this information starting from here and moving forward.
So just to follow up on that point, Director, through rules, would you be able to affect what you just described? In other words, if we were to set a line, all we would need to do in rule is to say, or through consideration of the department on a particular case that's from the 1950s, for example, pending, if you get approval from the agency, it seems to me like that might be a way to handle that, wouldn't it?
Mr. Chairman, I think so. I think we could use terminology as must or shall and may in our rules to allow for older cases, but require cases from whatever that date is forward. Yes, sir.
Further questions of DCI? Okay, I've got one final one. Commander Cox. So we flirted with this whole budget notion, and you can tell that's the big lift. And so my question to you is, if let's just hypothetically say that we could provide the funding for another position, do you feel like you would have a shot at putting together this database on your own with someone to look after it?
Mr. Chairman, yes, from my experience in this, I have confidence, a good amount of confidence that we will be able to put something together that would mimic what looks like our missing person database that's displayed on our webpage. And with the personnel that were provided, I have confidence we could do that. With the big disclaimer, we're at the whim of Google and what they choose to do.
Okay, thank you. And Director, would you, oh, excuse me, go ahead, Representative Cheston.
Thank you, Commander Cox. Mr. Chairman, Commander Cox, is there some advantage to having your database line up with the databases in other states? It sounds like part of the goal here is to have states sharing information so you can look for common MOs and things like that. So do you have some kind of a head start from other states that have done this that you could work with and maybe have some benefit to coordinate with other states?
Commander Cox, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, your answer is yes. We have already reached out to other states. We've already shared our column data with them, and they've shared with us. And hence, that's why our internal spreadsheet has probably grown from somewhere between 50 and 60 columns to now pushing 100 columns of data, because we are examining what the other states are gathering and at times what they wish they would have gathered, because they've already moved ahead with a project and have a product that they maybe cannot manipulate so easily.
Follow up? Okay. Anything else, committee? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I just want to toss out here that we don't define what a database is, what purpose it will fulfill. That's pretty wide open in this bill draft. So it seemed to me that the funding issue, we can grow the final product to meet the available funding, or we can shrink the product to match available funding. The question is, what do we gain by having a robust computerized database that we don't already gain in your spreadsheet that you're describing? Because it seems to me that your investigative files are something different from your database. But what I'm hearing is maybe that the two can come together and that we can use the database to make our investigative files more productive. Am I following the right lead here?
Commander, that sounds like your direction.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative. I agree. That is essentially what we're trying to do, is marry an internal database of different criteria of the crime that got committed years ago, and marry that with a product that's going to display that data to other law enforcement agencies on one side of the product and and the public on the other side of the product. So what do we get from buying a product is maybe just a little bit of peace of mind that we're leaving this work in the hands of a professional, that they're trained, they know how to build databases, they know how to build web pages, versus in all reality, depending on me and my computer skills, because that's essentially how we came about with our modification to our missing persons. And just as a side note on that, before we were just manually punching it into a web page, data entry into the web page, and it was using this newer product, we are finding we knew immediately and have found that we can save time. We already had the spreadsheet behind the scenes of missing persons. All we did is take a viewer to look at that spreadsheet and display the fields that we want to display. So we've just saved another set of data entry. They're actually triple data entering that to get it to display to the public. And this product, the free option that we're looking at, would just save time and do the exact same thing, where it would be a one-time entry and then a display one side to law enforcement, one side to the public. If that answered all your questions, Representative.
So Commander, you talked about 150 entries just with respect to homicides. Can you throw out a figure? And if you did, I missed it, on missing persons, sexual assaults. That makes this a much more robust database if you include those items, does it not?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it obviously does. I believe our missing person is currently around 83 missing persons in the state. Now, we have that database, and then we move into a weird area of crossover where we've got the short-term missing person that is only missing for a week, and then we remove them from the database after they're located. And then we've got a good core of long-term missing persons that are currently displayed on our webpage, which are easy for your examination if you like, that we have people missing for hundreds and thousands of days, that would be maybe also well represented, obviously, in our cold case database. So 83 is the number for or about. In fact, if you go to our webpage, it easily displays there what our current number is. And then as far as sexual assaults, I don't have a number, but I would venture to say, and this is just a true estimate, that it would be almost equal to our cold case homicides and possibly more. Again, it's a pretty unexplored field, so I don't have those numbers very well.
So potentially 300 to 400 entries.
And unidentified human remains, which there's a handful, or more than a handful, I should say a couple dozen maybe, of unidentified human remains would be what my estimate would be.
Okay, appreciate that, Commander. Thank you. Anything further, committee? Let's go to the next bill, Director. I'd really like to have your thoughts, and if you can drill down a little bit and help us make sure we understand the facts and figures that you provided, which we really appreciated. I just had trouble getting arms around what are we looking at. So take it away, Director. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So working draft 59, I do have, I guess, would you like for me to start with my thoughts first, or would you like me to jump into the numbers?
I think your thoughts first. Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's take this from top to bottom and take a hard look at this one too, just like we did the other one.
Okay, so my thoughts, I think there's a lot of stuff in here that's not necessary, because I think we have the authority to do a lot of the stuff that is being proposed in this bill. For example, the subsection little c, the division may utilize the services of retired peace officers. I think that is a great idea. However, if we had the appropriation of the funding today to hire help to work on cold cases, now whether that be a contractor or a contract part-time state employee, whatever that looks like, I think we already have the ability, and we likely would probably look at hiring retired peace officers to provide that service. If we were to do that, we likely would not hire a retired peace officer that didn't retire in good standing. We obviously would not hire somebody who's been previously decertified. We would conduct a full background investigation on that person.
So Director, on that count, that takes me right to page 5, I think, when we begin to outline some expectations of who would take on that part-time role. Are you saying that we could amend to just simply have some general language with regard to giving you the ability to hire part-time help? What are your suggestions from, say, paragraph I on page 5? Do you have anything written down that you would suggest to us?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me back up. I'll address that, but let me back up just a little bit here. We have, I believe we currently have the authority to investigate cold cases if we were directed by the Attorney General. If she came to me and said, we are going to investigate this case, that is what we would do. We also currently accept cases from local agencies at their request. Now, one thing we don't do is just go in and take cases from local agencies. That we don't have the authority to do that, nor is that something that we would want to do. As far as suggestions, my suggestion really would be, I think this could be shortened quite a bit for, as far as subsection C goes, I think that is perfectly makes perfect sense, but from I down to probably IV retired, I guess line 8 on page 7. I'm not sure that all of that information is necessary to achieve what I believe the committee's goal is with this bill. Now, subsection, I guess, line 12, page 7, if the division declines to investigate a case, we will provide written explanation. I think that is fine. I think it provides good transparency, and it provides us and the local agency a written reason as to why we're not accepting the case. But I also asked Ms. Singleton to be here as well to talk about a few of the things that she sees in this bill, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Director. And we'll save any questions for you. Go ahead, Ms. Singleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo what Director Jones has said about our authority already to do this. We have task force officers, contractors that are hired on other cases, not just cold cases. So we believe that DCI already has this authority. So I agree, beginning page 5, probably after the first sentence in Romanet I, we could probably remove the remainder of that. So the division may utilize the services of a retired peace officer and leave it at that. Most of the other stuff is within DCI policy anyway. Then moving on to page 6, I think we're comfortable with Romanet 2 on page 6, but Romanet 3 and 4, I don't believe are necessary. And Romanet 5, again, we are comfortable with providing a written explanation for cases that we would decline to review. And then Romanet 6, beginning on line 18, we would just request that be the division may pursue any federal funding and not be a shall. A variety of policy considerations go into that. So we would just like the discretion whether or not to pursue that federal funding. And I think that would solve some of our concerns with just some duplicative information in the bill and help us be more comfortable with that we still have the authority to direct how these investigations are handled. Certainly, we support retired peace officers being a part of this process. We just think we already have that authority. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman, for the director. So if these retired officers are not going to be considered agents, what would their status actually be? And what statutory authority would they have? Do you envision them working pretty much like an agent? Will they have a car? Will they be driving around interviewing people, or will they be office bound? And that sort of thing.
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Washington. Those are decisions that will, obviously have to be made if this passes. But my thoughts on it today is that they would likely be contractors. I did watch the testimony from the last meeting, and there was some talk about, would we make them reserve agents? Would they be sworn? I don't want to back myself into a corner, but as I sit here today, I don't think that is necessary. I think that I think the work could be done and should be done by contractors. They would work hand in hand with sworn agents. I don't think that, they would not, be allowed to go out and do interviews on their own and kind of just do their own thing. They would certainly be under the direction of a sworn agent, probably the case agent on whatever case that they're working. But I feel like, at least today, based on what I understand, the purpose of this is that I would support making them contract employees to do their work.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Director, so if we did that, if we went back to the idea of the contractor or the consultant, other than the money, of course, do you see any need for this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings. It depends on what the committee wants. If we were to receive the money, we would be able to do more work on cold cases. If we don't receive the money, or we don't, the bill doesn't pass, we will continue to do the work that we currently do.
Follow up, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but wouldn't the money just enhance your capabilities? It's not necessary that we have legislation spelling out about hires or agents when you could do consultants and contracting anyway. So other than the money, I understand the money would enhance your capability, and if we could, add a few zeros, you could do several more. But for the real nitty gritty work, minus the money, you basically have this capacity already. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, I would agree with your statement. I do believe we currently have the authority to be able to do this if we have the appropriation.
So Director, just to follow up on that count, I think one of the things that the joint committee I think initially felt was simply that we've got an awful lot of really good officers out there who are not that long into retirement. And at least for me, I thought, any incentive that we can give, to try to utilize some of the expertise that we already have in Wyoming, seemed to make sense to me. So I think that was part of the genesis of the bill is, can we set up a little bit more leeway for you folks at DCI to take advantage of some of the people that we already have? I hope that makes sense. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman, and then we'll go to Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along these lines, I think we could probably accomplish the funding with a budget amendment, but we've been trying to avoid legislating within the budget. And if we want to be specific about how this increased funding is utilized, it seems to me we need to grant some direction. And that's why I think we can streamline this bill. But I think the purpose of the bill is to give direction about what this committee believes is a need within the state, and then we can add the money into the budget.
Let's go to Park County, Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this question is for any of you. Looking back historically, has DCI exercised the authority that you believe currently exists to hire retired law enforcement as consultants?
Director, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez Williams, no, not up to this point. We have not. And that's because of the appropriation.
Okay, thank you for that. Did I see a hand? Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, back to the budget amendment idea. There's a difference between in the budget taking a program and expanding it with a budget amendment versus creating an entirely new responsibility for, the agency. And it sort of seems to me that if we were to propose a budget amendment that, specified that it would be added to this existing program within the agency, I don't see how we can be too far afield on that and be real simple and easy. If we were to try to create a brand new program from scratch, new responsibilities, all that, that's clearly inappropriate for a budget amendment. But this is already a program or within a program at the agency, and certainly we could expand that with a budget amendment.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Senator. That's really helpful. I think one of the other things that needs to be on our minds is, are we in any way trying to single out by the cold case database and cold case work? Is that different enough that you kind of walk a line there? I don't know. I know, Director, you're getting the sense that the joint committee it feels pretty strongly that we want to do what we can on this cold case front. And at any rate, good stuff. Thank you, Senator. Any further questions? Go ahead, Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to beleaguer this, but
no,
back to the director. So if we did this as a budget amendment and we went to a 2-year budget amendment, would that give you time? I mean, would that not give us a picture of basically a pilot program for 2 years to set up the database and begin to work some of those and have a feel for what might be successful and what, maybe we do want to go down this road later on, but would 2 years seems like that would give us an idea of a pilot program type thinking. Would that work in your opinion?
Director, does that intrigue you at all?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, you're going to have to excuse my ignorance on the whole process that you're talking about. If I understand you correctly, if that were to happen, there would be an appropriation for 2 years. I think that would be appropriate as it relates to the cold case database, for sure. We would be able to potentially create our own for free. Well, sort of for free. I don't think he would feel like it was for free. But we would also be able to see how much time it takes for, whether it's one person full-time or one person part-time to manage the database. I think that would be appropriate. Now, when we talk about this bill specifically and the appropriation for 2 full-time positions, I would be very hesitant to hire 2 guys into a full-time position and to have to say to them, look, we're going to give you this great job, but it may go away in 2 years. I would be very hesitant about that. Does that answer your question, sir? Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So in your notes that you provided us, you talked about a grant that you received back in 2014. I'm taking it that grant is no longer there, and that really was much of what Representative Jennings was describing, kind of a pilot program. And I also see that within there was a reserve of money that was able to be used for investigative expenditures, whether it be DNA work or other types of investigative work was included in that grant. And I found that very useful because I think what's missing in this bill is an allocation or an appropriation specifically for that type of work. I just keep coming back to that great story that Ron Francel wrote about in his book, where an investigation ground to a halt because money couldn't be found to exhume a body from inside this mine shaft. And certainly my goal, and I think the committee's expressed some support for this idea, that we don't want that to happen, that maybe we need to insert not just an appropriation for the database, but in the second bill, an appropriation so that the people you have, whether they're, retired or your active duty agents, that they always have the resources to go out and do the job. So that's one reason I kind of like the idea of having this bill go forward rather than just budget amendments, and that we can also build in an appropriation, not just for these personnel, but also for investigative tools.
Deep work in the bill. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that was a question, more of a statement.
Director, any thoughts on that front?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the reason I included that information in this document was because there has been talk about, this pot of money that we would have available to us to conduct these investigations. And there's been some questions about how much, what does that look like? I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think this is a good number for us to reference. It was a 3-year spending period, a $90,000 grant, and we spent $85,000 of it. Now, if you would like, I did bring a breakdown, a little bit more of what we spent within that money, but I really provided that just kind of as a here's what we did in the past and that's how much money we got for this amount of time. Just for reference, really.
Director, just as an example, can you give us a couple of line items out of that 85,000? What sorts of things were you able to benefit from that grant?
Mr. Chairman, so we spent about $26,000 in overtime and benefits to work cold cases. We spent $6,100 in training, homicide training, cold case summit, where we were able to send agents to some training. We spent about $27,000 in in-state and out-of-state travel to conduct these investigations. And we spent about $15,500 in professional services. One of them was excavating services. There's some DNA profile services that we used, as well as a pediatric forensic pathologist who helped us with the cold case in Green River.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, committee? Anything else? Director, any final comments on these two bills? Any further thoughts from your associates?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything further, Commander Cox.
Okay, and we were pretty good to your voice, I hope, Ms. Singleton. Yeah, okay. Take care, both of you. Thank you for being here. We reserve the right to fire a question at you a little bit later if that comes. So, do we have anyone from the sheriffs or chiefs of police here? Kind of thought we did. We know, but if you could state your name for the record, we would appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of WASCOP, the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And we've had some continuing discussion with regards to these bills, both with DCI and with our entities from across the state. And at this time, there's no major concerns from the chiefs and sheriffs, as the bill is written. One thing that I know that was discussed was the look back time frame. And I think I mentioned that in the last meeting that, with some agencies that 20, 30, 50-year look back might become kind of onerous without institutional knowledge in those organizations. So I could see that as a funding concern for our agencies, depending on how far that look back is. And then one thing that came to mind with the public database thing as we were discussing this, and I just would want to make sure that we were communicating with DCI as they promulgate rules regarding those agencies that have these cases, and making sure they have some agency input when it comes to sharing that case information on the public side of those websites. So that's something I'm sure we can come to an agreement with conversations with DCI. I'd be happy to answer any question, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for the chief sheriffs? Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, go ahead, Representative Jennings. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's Mr. Thompson, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, thought I'd get that correct. So on the look back of that and the working with DCI for the rules of things of that, there's on page 2, the staff comment is between 3 years definition and 1 year. Do you guys have a preference to what that looks like in the definition?
That I guess, Mr. Chairman, to answer the good senator or representative's question, the look back I was talking about is not the definition, but I don't know that we had a definite preference in a 1 year or 3 year, just as long as it was consistent among the statutes.
Okay, further questions? Anything further?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Everybody's pointing one way or the other here. So follow up for Representative Jennings. Sorry.
I
Thank you.
wasn't going to, Mr. Chairman, but they all wanted me to keep on, I guess.
Yeah, we
Um,
do. No, go
so-
ahead. Yeah, we're right behind you.
So it seems like that there could be some disconnect, I mean, there obviously is a disconnect between the three and the one. But for local law enforcement, I mean, I can think of places where you might not want to turn everything over to DCI at a 1 year period. And so I guess I'm gonna press you a little bit on that because, it seems like that you could have people on a cold case and maybe they have something going, but if we go with one, they're gonna turn that over. I mean, statutorily, they're going to. I mean, and so that's why I was pushing for the question of what you guys, how you viewed that, because it seems like there might be cases where you would not want to turn that quickly.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Chairman, I don't view this statute as local agencies turning the case over to DCI. I think it's an information sharing process that helps maybe share that information with even other states, but definitely other jurisdictions across the state, with DCI having the ability to assist, warehouse that information. But as I read the statute, I don't see anywhere where the local agency doesn't continue to work that case.
So, Mr. Thompson, regarding the issue of some of your membership, recent retirees or even retirees who've been around for a while, did you get any feedback with regard to us promoting the idea of utilizing some of the expertise and talent that we have? Maybe some of them are private contractors. I don't know how that works, but the sense of the joint committee, I think, is that we wanted to at least look into the idea of utilizing some of your membership. Have you bounced that around? Do you have any thoughts on that? Any feedback?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in the conversations I've had with our administrators, that I haven't had conversations with retired personnel in my short stint in this role. I would imagine there's interest in it. And I don't see that there would be any problems arise from that amongst our membership. I did notice that the conversation earlier this morning talked about maybe some conflicts with Wyoming Retirement System members and coming back as part-time. Our general membership, for the most part, is involved in a separate Wyoming Retirement System. There should be no conflict there. And I don't know of any issues that have come to light in that vein.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else, committee? All right, thank you, Mr. Thompson. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there anyone else in the room who would like to come forward and provide any testimony on these two bills? Anyone else in the room? Let's go to public comment, and do we have anyone online who would like to testify on these two bills? Eve, I didn't pick up on that, but nobody does?
No, it's one person.
Oh, one person. Okay, can you let them in, please, and we'll have them introduce themselves and welcome their testimony. Sometimes that happens. Yeah. We don't mean to run anybody off. Okay, good morning. Can you please unmute and introduce yourself for the record? Welcome.
Hello. Chairman.
Go ahead.
My name is Jason Hanson. I'm actually here to testify on the next topic, but as I sit here and listen to the discussion, I couldn't help but want to comment and suggest that, when it comes to the building of a database such as this that you're talking about in these bills, you might want to think about using the University of Wyoming students, because they actually learn to build databases while they're going through computer education programs. And I just wanted to put that suggestion in as a citizen. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hanson. Any questions? Appreciate that, and we'll probably see you a little later in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else popping up online, Eve? Are we good? Okay, I'm going to close public testimony. And committee, we've got a couple of bills here that I think probably at least deserve our attention or consideration. So what about, let's take them in order. LSO 047, the cold case database bill. What's your pleasure on that bill, committee?
Move the bill.
Mr. Co-Chairman moved. Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative. Thank you. Discussion. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it was Senator Case who mentioned when we were talking about the budget amendment and letters to the appropriators and so forth, when we were talking about this in Sheridan in April, and it was his suggestion at that time that we do both, that the committee not only communicate with the Joint Appropriations Committee, but also run a bill, and that nothing sends a message to the Appropriations Committee in terms of the level of support from the committee better than to have a bill. So I'm just urging the committee, we can talk about the appropriation within this bill, but I think that establishing this database is an important step forward for the state in terms of accountability. The director testified about that, and that trying to keep cold cases from being cold. And while we're talking about money, and it seems like a whole lot of money, think about if that one of those victims was a family member or somebody that you loved and cared about, and the idea that somebody committed this murder or sexual assault, or your family members just disappeared, and the worry that they've just been forgotten. And I think having a database where these names and some limited details are out there for the public is important. And we talked about in April that we don't really know for sure. We're making some estimates, but certainly how far we go back, we go back into the 1930s and 40s. Records weren't then what they are today. And so we really don't know how many victims we have out there whose cases just got, buried by the onslaught of current cases. And that was our whole objective when we started in April, was to not lose sight of these victims. And I think that this appropriation, we can talk about the money, but I think this is an important bill, and I think we ought to move it forward.
Further comment? Representative Jimmy? Anything to add? Okay. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, it's always tricky to have your own words thrown back at you, but I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I don't feel that we know what this database is or how it'll work. I sort of think we need to pilot and bootstrap it. I'm not real happy with the thinking that's gone into it so far. I'm really not. And I don't know what we're buying. I have no idea.
Senator, I think there's some merit in that. I'm just sitting here thinking, sometimes having been around for a little while, sometimes I've learned that it's okay to go forward, even if it's a billboard kind of situation where awareness is kind of the key for maybe a little bit of a cattle prod. I think in addition to this, I just wanted to let the committee know that I had a discussion with the chairman of our tribal relations committee, and I found it of interest that the tribal committee, and I think we have a couple here who serve on that committee, but they too have taken up the issue of some of these cases that have gone unsolved. And just as a point of reference, I think this could be a companion to, I think the focus on that one, perhaps. It's not completely public at this point, but I think they've been talking about DNA and the ability for some kind of funding to go toward these cold cases. For me, that's part of the draw of this bill, is just that it would, maybe we can thread a needle and find a way to make sure that there's some resources there so that we don't run into any brick walls when a cold case is being investigated. We don't want it to come to a screeching halt. So that's kind of what's on my mind. And I'd be inclined to at least forward it so we can continue to work it. But any further comments, committee? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Just a concluding comment on what are we buying? You know, I suspect that many times when we make appropriations to buy computer related technology, most of us don't really know what are we buying. We're buying some software that a company, I think the testimony was that there's companies out there that specialize in making these kinds of databases, and that they have given bids, and that this was the lower of the two bids that came forward. I think it's okay for us as a committee to say, you know, we can put some money in here. We're a long way from the finish line. We're going to talk about this more during the session. By then we may have a vendor who can actually, you know, come to the meeting and show us a little, you know, video presentation of what their software does or what they do in some other state. But remember that we were the ones who asked the agency to come forward, right? This was our idea. We put this topic on an interim discussion. We asked the agency to come forward. The director, they've done, I think, due diligence in terms of exploring the options that are out there. I just encourage the members to vote aye on this bill. We can fine tune it during the session.
Okay, committee, unless there's any other opening comments, let's work the bill. Let's take a look at page 1. Are there any considerations on page 1? What about page 2? Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out the problems on line 15, and the director agreed with that there's complications in that definition if you're going to advance this bill. And I don't think I can support it from the standpoint that I think we see a pilot program more from the budget amendment. But if you're going to advance this, I think and I don't know what the answer to that is. We have legal minds in the staffing, and I don't know, but I think you should address it because I think it's got real problems.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I would move an amendment to just put a period after the word agency on line 15. That you go a very objective 1-year period. At the end of that year, agencies would have an obligation to make that information available to DCI. And again, DCI is not assuming responsibility for the case or investigation. It just gives us a date certain that if a homicide or one of these other cold cases has not been solved within a year, at that point, it gets referred to the database. The director mentioned, you know, if it's already been referred to a prosecutor, that might, you know, not require it. I think that can be addressed in a rule. But I think we just put a period after agency on line 15 and delete the remainder of line 15 and 16.
Okay, do I have a second? Second by Representative Provenza. Does everyone understand the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. The amendment carries. We're back on page 2. Anything further on page 2?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jennings.
I think at some point, even though it's in the other bill, you've almost got to address the 1 and the 3 year issue, because if you put it in 1 and it doesn't match up, so it seems like this might be the time to address that too.
Do you have a proposed amendment, Representative Jennings?
I would move that we move those to, we take the definition of 3.
Okay, so on line 14, committee, do I have a second on that? Seconded by Representative Oakley. Changing 1 year to 3 years. Discussion. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just, 1 year is a very, very short time in investigations. So I think this is appropriate and probably important.
Okay. Anything further? All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No.
No.
Okay, the amendment has carried. Anything further on page 2? How about page 3? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 3, line 2, after case, inserting that dates 1962 through present. And that would help. That sets it at 80 years old. So I figure instead of cleaning out our nursing homes to put them in our jails, if we did get a cold case figured out, I mean, I guess maybe we could, but majority of them are already locked up anyways. So we could probably turn around and we could probably put 1962 to present, which would give us the ability to actually be going after cold cases that are present.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Oakley. Okay, discussion on that one. Mr. Co-Chairman, and then we'll go to Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. In terms of the prosecution viability of these cases, I think that makes some sense in terms of keeping the database. We're not putting a ton of work into cases that are highly unlikely. And I guess that's my only reserve about the 3-year thing, was that after 3 years, our chances of solving these cases have diminished more than at 1 year. But still, in terms of the 1962 and before, I just, got to think about the victims. If that was your family member who was murdered in 1961, and, just to have that case file lost to history is something to think about.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern with throwing in the date in this statute is that we're going to have to come back to it. And we're going to have to keep changing it, whereas we can put it in rules. They can make a determination as a division to decide what's worthy or not worthy of investigation. And then we're not tied to having to come fix this every 2 years or however often, because time flies. I don't know if anybody's noticed.
Further discussion, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We wouldn't have to change it because once the database is established through present, they'll just continue to add new material in. So this just sets a one-time. So in other words, everything from, we could have a cold case from the 1850s. We don't have to touch that one. So it'd be 1962. We would establish everything after that would be till present. So they just have to continue to update their database every single year. We wouldn't have to retouch this, as far as my understanding would be.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess sitting here, I'm just a little bit concerned that even that might be too far back. And I'm looking at our, executive director for our local agencies, and they're going to be digging out a lot of cases out of their basements. Every single one of the agencies, law enforcement agencies in the state. And I know we're worried about the victims, but at some point there has to be some utility attached to that as well. That's a long time ago. And there's, I don't know what the odds are of, solving some of those cases, but it's going to take some man hours for them to put together all the information that DCI is going to develop by rule and request from them. So it's just, I don't know, the thought there. I appreciate the effort to limit it to some date. I just think that might be too far back.
I just, thank you, Representative, and good comments made on this. I just wonder if we shouldn't trust, the agency to take care of what they think is relevant and what's not. I honestly don't think we're gonna be chasing cases back in the 50s and 60s anyway. We've got our hands full with more recent ones, but that's the amendment, on the floor is to change cold cases. Can you help us with that language again, Representative? From 1962 to present, I believe, right?
So I had it in here that on line 2, page 3, after case, insert that dates 1962 to present. I had 72, and I'm good with that. And I could make that if my second feels that's friendly. My issues, I just don't want it to be a deal where we open up the deepest, darkest basement doors and pull out the cases that really we're not going to be able to actually bring justice to. So, but the original amendment as stated was that dates 1962 through present. But I would consider changing that to 72 if my second would be consider that friendly.
Sure.
So 1972.
And
so that would be at 70 years old if we brought this around as July 1st.
She did consider that as a friendly amendment, so that now would read 72 to present.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so go ahead, Senator Case.
Just trying to get my head around the database a little bit. The database doesn't necessarily say we're going to go after these cases.
Right.
It doesn't say what we're going to do with it. It's just somebody's name and their information and the circumstances. Somehow, we haven't figured that part out, is included in this database so that other people can look at it. This is not the bill that directs the department's efforts, if I read that right. So whether it says 62, 55, 80, does it really matter? Yeah. This is just the database. And if there's information, it might be limited on a 1950s case that someone could spend an hour putting it in database over the course, and it stays there forever. And 10 years from now, somebody stumbles on it and said, there's a connection. Where's the harm in that? It's just a database. And we just add more information as we go along. So I don't see the limit.
Thank you, Senator.
I want to get Tom Horn exonerated.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only concern is not the work that DCI is going to be putting in. My concern is the work that we're going to ask our local agencies to be putting in. And that's why I appreciate the date, some sort of date certain going back. I don't know what that is. I'm fine with actually DCI picking that date and what they think's a viable date. But that's my concern. I wholeheartedly agree that this isn't asking anybody to do anything except our local agencies are going to be required to submit information if the bill were to pass.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor. Is there further discussion? Representative Jennings.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so as I read some of that, page 3, line 6, all law enforcement agencies within the state shall cooperate with the division in establishing and maintaining an efficient coordinated system. I'm sitting here wondering, and the country lawyer and I don't very often come down on the same side, but I'm wondering, would this force all of our sheriffs, all of our police departments to go into their basement and dig out every felony sexual assault case and that was more than 3 years old since we did the other one, and they have to go back all the way? And so I think we're maybe asking a pretty heavy lift there. I'm not opposed to them doing it, but I don't know. I think once you Mr. Thompson might have us a better idea of how many things in the basement there are across the state. Seems like that might be a heavy lift.
Thank you, Representative. Just to answer that question, yes, I think it will be a lift. I think that's part of the intention is to stand up a cold case database. So the amendment, are we any more discussion on the amendment? It is now reading 72 to present after cold case. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
That amendment has failed. We're back on page 3. Anything else on page 3? To page 4. The section allows for an appropriation. Is there any proposed amendment for page 4? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Under line 1, section 3, insert $150,000.
Can I have a second? Seconded by Representative Provenza. Discussion. Any discussion? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Let's show a raise of hands for those in support of the amendment. The amendment passes. You want the nose? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, thank you, Representative Jennings. Yeah. Okay, so anything else on page 4? Are you ready for Representative Craigo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't have an amendment specific in mind, and so I apologize, but just for discussion purposes, because I don't know what we will end up doing on the next bill, but I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to maybe put some language in the appropriation that we just voted on that would also allow, if the 150,000 isn't all needed for the database, if that could also be used for actually doing some of the work related to the database, i.e. hiring agents, et cetera. I'm just thinking here because the next bill gets, I think we've heard lots of testimony this morning. The next bill might not be necessary, that we can already do what we need to do without the next bill. But if the appropriation's limited like it is exclusively to the database, that money could only be used for the database. If they're able to do it for cheaper than that and have extra money left over, we could actually use it for, some of these part-time agents or whatnot. I think we might, if there's maybe a room for an amendment there.
Representative, thank you. That gets me to thinking, what if this is the only vehicle that makes it to February? So that's something to think about. Go ahead, Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback on that, it looks like on page 4, line 6, where it says this appropriation shall not be transferred or expended for any other purpose. And any unexpended, unobligated funds remaining of this shall revert back. So I think that might be the place to delete that and reword it.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jennings.
On line 6, I think if we took the not be transferred and said may only be used for database and investigatory purposes.
I like where this is going, committee. I think appreciate the direction. So Representative Rodriguez Williams, I see you working on that and maybe incorporating a thought from down in Representative Jennings' district. Any further thoughts to add to what is being considered here? Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we have to think about the title of the bill if we go down this road. And we're an interim committee. We could actually change the title and put an action clause somewhere in the bill But if we're gonna do an appropriation that has, if we're gonna broaden the appropriation without broadening the title of the bill, I don't see how that constitutionally passes muster. So, you know, I'd be okay with like putting some conforming language in the title and then authorizing the division to spend money on investigating. Maybe still in section 1.
Senator, I always appreciate your cautions and expertise on certain things. So let's go to Mr. Fuller.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, certainly within the committee's prerogative to amend the appropriation. I would probably leave the sentence in that begins on line 6 and would amend the first sentence to accomplish what the committee is looking for. I think, you know, I've heard a couple of different things, Mr. Chairman. I think the only question would be whether the funds must be spent on the database first, and then any unexpended funds could be expended on investigations, or whether the appropriation could be spent on both simultaneously, and then the funds, any unexpended funds would just revert at the end of the biennium.
So, Mr. Fuller, do you follow Senator Case's thoughts that we probably need a title change on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I think just as a matter of notice, you know, the catch title could be changed to just cold cases or something more generic. In terms of the bill title, though, I don't know if anything's changing. We're still providing an appropriation. If something were to change in the substantive language earlier in the bill, perhaps, but and of course, certainly within the committee's prerogative to amend that bill title right now, at least.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, it's kind of a fine line, but having served on appropriations, if we have a bill that says the school districts can buy school buses, and then we have in the appropriation, we specify that it can be used for school buses or for flagpoles. That's cheating a little bit, you know? And so that's the non-codified language. And it'd be super clean if they were tied together a little bit better.
So, Senator Case, are you thinking cold case database and investigation? Something in that neighborhood?
Yes, for the appropriation, but I think we need to also take the title in the front and develop and line 3, develop and maintain a cold case database and expend funds on cold case investigations. And then in one more conforming place, just to tie it all up together. And I would think it would be in section 1 in our list, and where it says, the first one is the division shall you know, we should instruct the division to do best efforts to investigate these resources. You know, one of these should have an investigatory requirement. And then I think that the appropriation would be perfectly fitting for it. And I don't think we need the other bill maybe in the end either. So I would be like another Romanet or a little, say, a D on page 3, line 5, say something like the division is authorized to the division shall, to the best of the resource available, investigate cold cases. Could do that too.
So
yours is different. We had this problem at our last committee. The bill that you see online is different than the bill that's the paper copy. The line numbers don't hit the same places, and it caused a lot of confusion. But from your packet, the paper copy, that same place after C, I think, is on a different page. Just check it, because we had the same problem in our last committee hearing, Mr. Chairman.
I've been online following your comments, Senator, and we might be okay, but
yeah,
I want to go to Brian real quick. Brian, just to make sure that you are kind of following where the senator is trying to get to an amendment on the bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, first, just to clarify, the paper copies that you should have should be 0.6.
Okay.
And that is the copy, Mr. Chairman, that is online 2-01 and 2-02. Mr. Chairman, I would note, and I'm actually going to refer to 24 LSO 59 right now. So not the bill we're working, but in that, and this was based on discussion from the committee, in that draft is 91618 that talks about basically the requirements and the authority that the division has. So with the approval of the Attorney General, the division may assist a state, county, or local law enforcement authority which requests assistance in investigating and detecting crime and enforcing the criminal laws of the state. I don't recall if Ms. Singleton said which provision, but I believe the testimony was that the division believes that they have authority to investigate cold cases already. And so I think the question would be, if a shall is added to this bill draft, I think it might have to do a little more finessing than just adding language that says shall investigate cold cases. Mr. Chairman, in terms of the appropriation, I'm not sure, certainly can add it to the bill title, change the catch title to make the bill broader. I don't know if any statutory change is necessary for the appropriation to appropriate funds for both a database and investigations.
Okay, thank you for that, Brian. We can certainly consider a title change, cold case database and investigations, if we're so inclined. I still like the direction that we might be going here, folks, because this could take care of an opportunity to maybe push forward on some cold case. So go ahead, Senator Case.
Yeah,
Not cold case, Senator Case.
I'm feeling pretty cold today, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Fuller's hit on it. And you could change that catch title or not. That's not the legal title that the Constitution is talking about, lines 1 through 7.
Right.
So that's the hunting license when people look to see if our bills conform to what we introduced. And so I'm perfectly happy saying cold case database and investigation at the top of the bill. But requiring the Division of Criminal Investigation develop and maintain, and then where's it? Provide an appropriation, and let's just say for database and investigation.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would just suggest after requiring a report adding a new clause authorizing funds for cold case investigations.
Perfect.
Does everyone understand that suggestion? I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, we've granted ourselves the authority to spend the money in a couple of different ways. Is there anything further that needs to be done on working draft 47? Did we take care of the language under section 3? And it seems like we should consider doing something. There's appropriated 150,000 from the general fund to the Office of the Attorney General, et cetera. Any thoughts, Brian, as to where we could pull in what we did on page 1, which was authorizing? I didn't mean to catch you cold.
No, that's all right,
Cold
Mr.
case
Chairman.
bill.
I think the only other question with that language would be the desire of the committee, whether they want to see these funds available for expenditure simultaneously between database and investigations, or if there is an intent from the committee to spend any unused funds from the database on investigations.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I think we need more than just that. I think we need to probably on line starting on line 5 add language or investigate cold cases. And I think that as long as we give it the agency can use the funds simultaneously or however they see fit.
So, Mr. Co-Chairman, I wonder if on the end of page, line 5, developing and maintaining a cold case database and investigation of cold cases, if that kind of language wouldn't cover everything we need it to do. That just allows for
that works for me.
and that's simultaneous. We may change our mind if the bill goes forward. We can certainly work that. But that would be a sentence that just says developing and maintaining a cold case database and investigation of cold cases.
Second.
So does that work? Representative, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that does because the following clause says in accordance with section 1 of this act, which I think relates exclusively to the development of the database.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that language could go right after of this act.
I think that's what I meant, Brian. I mean, didn't I say that? I think that's right where it needs to go. So if, somebody seconded that, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's what you meant too?
Yeah.
Okay, does everybody know what that now states, the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Oh. Let's back up. That's my bad. Representative Craigo, my apologies. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I should have spoken up. I guess I just have a thought question is, what is our policy choice? Do we want to devote those funds to the database first? Is that our first goal? I mean, in my opinion, it is. I'd rather see us devote the money to that first. I mean, that was our initial thoughts going down this trail anyways. So if we wanted to, we could put that language in there, or according to your amendment, we can just leave it up to the discretion of the department as well. Just throwing that out there.
As it reads now, Representative, good point. It reads simultaneous. If you go back to line 4, to be expended only for purposes, we could potentially do something like to be expended primarily for purposes of developing and maintaining a database. And then it follows with language and investigation of cold cases. We could do that, committee. That leaves it a little nebulous for our agency. But I think the bill would then state that we would like to see the development of the database first. Representative Chestic.
I don't think that works because the question then arises, what does primarily modify? Does it modify the database, or does it also modify investigate cold cases? In which case it primarily do any of those things or something else entirely. So I don't think primarily is going to help us there.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if the committee has an intent to proceed down that road, we'd probably rewrite section 3 entirely and make clear that funds must be expended first on the database and then unexpended for investigations. But Mr. Chairman, I don't want to interject too much. I know there's a motion on the table.
Thanks for, there actually was not a formal motion. We were just talking potentially about something, but Brian, thanks for bailing us out. I think we go with a conceptual amendment if it's the desire, committee, and I'm seeing a couple of head shakes. Yes, that we primarily want to develop the database, but allow for some flexibility. Is that, am I reading that correctly? So are we okay with a conceptual amendment that would effectively do that? All those in favor of that motion? I guess we should get a motion in a second. Do I have a motion from Representative Craigo? Move. Seconded by Representative Harrelson. conceptual amendment on section 3, which would accomplish what we just stated. All those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Okay, that amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. Anything else? Anything else? Okay, roll call, please, Clarissa, on 0047.
Senator Case, Senator Cooper,
No.
Senator Furphy, Senator Schuler, Representative Testic,
Aye.
Representative Craigo, Representative Haroldson,
No.
Representative Jennings, Representative Nemec, Representative Oakley, Representative Provenza, Representative Rodriguez Williams, Co-Chairman Washit,
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 11 ayes, 3 noes.
Okay, working draft 47 has passed the committee and will be forwarded on to the session. No doubt with other work that could and should be done. So let's move on, committee, real quickly to LSO 59, working draft point 6. Discussion on that bill. Any discussion? Oh, we do need a motion. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Is there a motion on 59? Do I have a motion on 59? Okay, 59 has died for lack of a motion. Committee, let's take a break and we will come back to law enforcement issues, sex offender registry requirements after a 10-minute break. 15. Let's go 15. Okay, committee, let's get back underway, running a little bit behind the agenda. Appreciated the work that we did this morning already. Let's move into our sex offender registry requirements issues. Katie, would you be willing to share with us some research regarding 62316? Really some nice work, by the way, but if you would take it away and kick off this topic for us.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So there's a memorandum in your materials entitled Classification of WS 62316A2. And essentially at the last committee meeting, the committee requested that LSO look into whether or not there's a discrepancy or a mistake under the Wyoming Sex Offender Registration Act in classifying that offense as a tier 3 offense under 719-302J. To answer that in short, I didn't find any evidence of a mistake. I think the committee made a decision in 2007 as to how to classify that, and I'll go over a little bit just quickly through that memo. So in 2007, the legislature enacted 62316A2 and designated it as a tier 3 offense under 719-302J. The memo does set out the elements of that offense on the very first page. And there are some definitions that are referenced there as well. So in 2007, Senate File 104, which was sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, created 4 new offenses, 1st through 4th degree sexual abuse of a minor. And it also amended some penalties and did a couple of other things in that bill. During that same session, the legislature passed House Bill 120, which was also sponsored by the Joint Judiciary Committee. And that bill revised the sex offender registration statutes following enactment of the Adam Walsh Act. And among other things, that bill created the 3 tiers of offenders that we now have, and it classified a bunch of different offenses under those tiers. After House Bill 120 was placed on general file in the Senate and Senate File 104 had passed the House, a senator proposed an amendment to add the sexual abuse of a minor offenses to the different tiers. And so that included placing 62316A2 in 719-302J as a tier 3 offense. The memo also notes that under the federal SORNA, the SMART office did a review of our registration statutes. And they said that 62316A2, the offense that we're talking about here, would require at a minimum a tier 2 registration requirement under SORNA. So from my review, it looks like the legislature decided to put it in a harsher or higher tier than that in 2007. I would also note that in the 2019 review, we do have that as attachment A, and there are some offenses that are noted in there that are either not included under our act or they're underclassified. And some of the sexual abuse of a minor offenses are included in that. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Okay, Katie, thank you for your work on that. Very well done. Questions, committee? Anything for Katie? Okay, let's move into consideration committee on. Let's start with LSO 288, our sex offender registration promoting obscenity bill, and then we'll move to 56, the sex offender registration bill. But let's start with 288. If you can walk us through that, Katie, I'd appreciate it. And then we will, of course, go to our folks in front here and on to public comment, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is 24 LSO 288 working draft 0.5. So if you'll recall at the last meeting, the committee moved for a draft bill to ensure that the offense of obscenity as provided in West Virginia statute 61-8A2 is a registrable offense in Wyoming. And so what I did was I went and looked at that offense in West Virginia and then also looked at our criminal offenses. And it looks like, based on LSO's review, that West Virginia code statute appears to contain the same or similar elements or arise out of the same or similar facts or circumstances as promoting obscenity. under Wyoming statute 64302A3 if the obscene material was knowingly disseminated to a minor. And so what the bill does is it adds that offense to section 719-302H as a tier 2 offense. And that really is just a placeholder. The committee could decide to put that in G, H, or J. There is another obscenity offense that's included under subsection H. And so that's why it was initially placed there. And then there's also a staff comment that has just sort of a question for the committee about whether or not it would want to designate the applicability of this if it did pass, whether it would apply to someone convicted on or after the effective date of this act, or before, on or after the effective date. And there is a notation that the Wyoming Supreme Court has generally held that requiring a person to register as a sex offender for a conviction that occurred before the registration requirement was enacted does not violate the ex post facto prohibition, because the act is considered regulatory rather than punitive. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Katie, thank you. Any questions? Clarifications, considerations for 288. Okay. I think we can probably stop there. Or we what do you think, Mr. Co-Chairman? Let's stop right here and consider 288. Welcome, ladies. Appreciate you being here. If you would if you have any comments on 288, we would appreciate and love that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Kelsey Singleton and I represent the Division of Criminal Investigation, and I'll let Ms. Moore introduce herself as well.
Good morning. I'm Ms. Allison Moore. I'm a Deputy Director of the Division of Criminal Investigation, and I'm over the Criminal Justice Information Services section, which houses our sex offender registry.
Go ahead, Ms. Singleton, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For this first bill draft 288, the Division of Criminal Investigation has no concerns about this bill. Really no comment. It's certainly within the discretion of this committee to add sex offenses to the registration section. And certainly Ms. Adams' memorandum was very thorough with that regard. Additionally, with regard to the research regarding sexual abuse of a minor in the 3rd degree, the division does not have anything to add to that matter either. We agree with the accuracy of the information provided in the memorandum provided by LSO, but would answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you, Ms. Singleton. Any questions for DCI? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Ms. Moore, just curious, how much work is created when we pass a change like this for your personnel in your office?
Ms. Moore, go ahead.
Chairman, Co-Chairman Washut. It really depends on how many convictions there have been. And I'm not sure how many convictions there have been on obscenity. But what that looks like is if you pick a date that the conviction occurred by, then we send letters and start reaching out to people to indicate that they need to register. Aside from that, there's work at the local level. The local sheriff's office is who handles the initial registration of sex offenders. And then we take care of the backside of that.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you. So if you remember, we had the testimony from the woman from West Virginia at our previous meeting. How would an individual like that, who was convicted in another state, who's now resident in Wyoming, how would we contact those individuals? Is there a process for that?
Ms. Moore, go ahead.
Chairman, Co-Chairman Washut. Not that I'm aware of, typically not, unless it comes to light in another way. For example, if someone were to have their fingerprints ran for something else and we determine that they had this conviction that is a registrable offense in Wyoming, then we would reach out to them. But I mean, there is the potential that if they're otherwise law-abiding citizens. We're not aware of who lives here and who doesn't live here.
Okay, anything further?
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman,
Senator, go ahead.
these witnesses may not be the right one. I'm just trying to go a little broader and think. And maybe our good friend, the prosecutors, both good friends that are got both ends of this table. Who decides if something's obscene? I'm having trouble with that. You know, you got a broad continuum out there and what's obscene? And how does that strike into a conviction and then go into there and how does that play out? How do you convict somebody for obscenity?
Ms. Moore, do you want to try that one?
Chairman, we don't deal with it at that stage. I would say that that is more of a prosecutor. We deal with it after the conviction.
Okay, I wanted to give you the opportunity anyway. We do have.
I said
some-
they may not be the right witness.
Yeah, we do have some folks on the committee that might be able to help us a little bit. Ms. Singleton, any comments on that or?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's certainly within the statute and case law that would speak to what is obscenity. I think Representative Oakley might have an additional few words for us.
She's got a lot of experience.
Yeah. So Representative Oakley?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman. I would agree with what Ms. Singleton just said. First of all, obscenity is defined and then, and I mean, of course, you're right that it can be, you know, that nebulous, whatever. So even finding definitions, but this is how Wyoming has done it. Obscene is material which the average person would find applying contemporary community standards taken as a whole appeals to the this is a prurient, that's all I'm not good at pronouncing that word, the prurient interest. B, applying contemporary community standards depicts or describes sexual conduct in a patently offensive way. And C, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So that's how Wyoming currently defines obscene.
And what is that?
Thank you, Representative. Senator Case, how'd that do right there? Thank you. Appreciate it, Representative. Anything further for our folks from the Attorney General and the DCI's office? Anything? Committee? Appreciate you guys. Thank you. We reserve the right to maybe call on you a little later if we have a question, okay? Is there anyone else in the room that wants to come forward and testify on 288? 288 is the sex offender registration obscenity bill. Anyone else in the room? Do we have anyone online, Eve, who has a hand raised and wants to testify on this particular bill? Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill?
Move the bill.
Moved by Senator Cooper, seconded by Representative Haroldson. Discussion. Any discussion? Are there any proposed amendments to LSO 288?
Mr. Chairman, if.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Fuller.
apologies for interjecting. I would just note, Mr. Chairman, that the statute that's amended in 288 is also in 24 LSO 56 as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there for the committee's consideration.
So, Mr. Fuller, what I read there in your comment is the fact that we could pull some language into the subsequent bill. Mr. Co-Chairman, given the circumstances going forward and numbers of bills and things, I wonder if that's not something we would want to consider.
Mr. Chairman.
I think we can vote on this one and then grab language and pull it back into 56. Easier than we could go the other way if once we pass it.
I think that's, yeah, good suggestion. Okay, we've got 288 on the floor then so are you ready for the question on 288?
Question.
Okay, Clarissa, would you please take roll on LSO 288?
Senator Case, Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler, Representative Chestick,
No.
Representative Crago, Representative Haroldson, Representative Jennings, Representative Nemec, Representative Oakley, Representative Provenza,
No.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Washett,
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 11 ayes, 3 noes.
Okay, LSO 288 has passed the committee. We'll move on to the session. And now back to Katie, if you would please walk us through 56, working draft point 4, sex offender registration, registrable offenses, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll
That might
actually.
be Brian. I'm
Yep,
sorry. I
I'll
keep
take.
mixing you guys up.
That's all right, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
So 24 LSO 56 working draft 0.4. This is a bill draft that the committee considered in September. After discussion, it was forwarded to this meeting. This draft is unchanged from the September meeting, and it adds offenses for which convicted offenders must register as a sex offender, and then repeals a definition in the sex offender registration statutes that is not used anywhere else in those statutes. Mr. Chairman, I would just, to explain the bill, just point the committee to the staff comment on page 2. This just outlines summarizes the offenses that are inserted into each subsection of the registration requirement statutes. So under 719-302G, this was the lowest tier and requires annual registration. It inserts the offenses of sexual servitude of an adult, felonious restraint only if the victim was a minor and if it was committed by someone who is not the parent or guardian of the victim. And then false imprisonment. And then similarly, again, only if the victim was a minor and only if committed by someone who is not the parent or guardian. Then, Mr. Chairman, for 719-302H, this is a change on page 4 of the bill draft, requiring semi-annual registration. The offense of sexual servitude of a minor is inserted. And then on page 5, line 16, in 719-302J, the strictest tier of registration or quarterly registration, the offenses of first-degree human trafficking and second-degree human trafficking are inserted. And then page 6, line 22, repeal 719-301A4, which is the definition of criminal offense against a minor. That definition is produced in a staff comment, and that term is not used, as far as I can tell, anywhere else in the statutes for sex offender registration. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, Brian. Well done. Any questions on the bill? Go ahead, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just trying to follow Mr. Fuller. Sorry, what was that last thing that you said that's not found anywhere else?
Yep.
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, it is a definition of the term criminal offense against a minor. And that is repealed in this draft. And based on my review, and this was a term identified by the Attorney General, based on my review, I could not see that term used in the sex offender registration statutes.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So along with that, that goes to what we talked about last time that I'm going to ask again. And I wonder if you have any like legal thoughts on it as far as removing the felonious restraint and the false imprisonment from this completely. And I've heard like, cause then we would like, it might not be SORNA compliant. I just cannot, if somebody could get me there, I cannot understand why felonious restraint and false imprisonment would be a sex offender registrable offense. If anybody want to try to get me there, I'd appreciate it. But do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Fuller?
Go ahead, Mr. Fuller.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley. I guess the one thing I would note is even though those two offenses are in that definition, the two offenses right now, as it stands, are not included in the sex offender registration. this bill draft proposes including them. Ms. Adams had a memorandum from the last meeting. I'd be happy to resend to the committee that kind of explains the history of the inclusion and then deletion of those offenses from the registration statutes.
Any follow-up, Representative? Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Fuller before we go to our partners? Okay. Ms. Singleton? And or Ms. Moore, take it away. What are your thoughts on this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding this bill, I just want to thank again the committee and LSO for their time and efforts drafting these important pieces of legislation. Specifically, this one came to our attention because there was a discrepancy between the definitions that were included in 301 versus what was included in 302, which is what we could require individuals to register for. And I think this bill does a great job of cleaning all that up and resolves those concerns. I do want to address Representative Oakley's questions. At last meeting, there was concern about including false imprisonment and felonious restraint in the list of registerable offenses. Certainly that is a policy decision for this committee. We did look into whether Wyoming would be an outlier in the sense of including it as a registerable offense or not. We looked at the other states and territories and whether they require registration for these crimes. It's not an exact science as each state has its own crimes with unique elements. But if a state didn't have, let's say, false imprisonment, they might have felonious restraint, or they have something similar like unlawful restraint, criminal restraint, all with very similar elements of either false imprisonment or felonious restraint. So of all the states and territories, over 35 required registration for an offense of either false imprisonment or felonious restraint. Some were either or, some were both. Almost all of them had the restrictions that are proposed by LSO, which is that the victim has to be a minor and it has to be an offender that was not the parent or guardian of the victim. And there were a handful of states where we couldn't find an offense that was comparable to false imprisonment or felonious restraint. So that might skew our results. There might be even more states that would require that registration. But again, it's comparing apples and oranges between states with their own offenses. Additionally, as outlined, false imprisonment is registerable under SORNA, the Federal Sex Offender Registration, if the victim is a minor and the offender is not a parent guardian. So it is possible that it could affect our SORNA compliance, and whether Wyoming is in substantial compliance. That too is not an exact science. So I can't say for certain whether this one change would be enough to put us out of compliance or not. Additionally, I too found the same research that LSO did with regard to the debate back in 2007, 2011 with regard to false imprisonment, felonious restraint. It seemed that the majority of the floor debate was focused on whether or not we were going to be requiring juveniles to have to register, if there's a circumstance where they had confined another juvenile. This bill draft, that wouldn't be a concern at all, because juveniles that are adjudicated delinquent, those are J offenses, and this is listed as a G offense. So this wouldn't apply to juveniles unless they were tried as adults. And in theory, in those cases, they were serious enough to maybe we should consider registration. But again, certainly this is a policy decision for the committee, and I just wanted to provide that information.
Thank you, Ms. Singleton. Well done. Questions? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Singleton. And I should know this, and it's all listed, but without looking them all up, besides false imprisonment, how many of these are misdemeanor? I mean, is that the only misdemeanor offense that we'd have on here? I mean, that if false imprisonment, I mean, it seems that to on one hand, call something a misdemeanor, and then the other hand, call it a sex offender registry offense. Again, I'm not logically seeing this, but anyway, so if do you know of any of the others that we have listed that are misdemeanors?
Ms. Singleton, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, I'm not 100% positive. I think I've looked it up in the past, but off the top of my head, I can't recall. There might be one or two others. You are correct that the majority are felonies.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Katie.
I did a little bit of a review for this based on the obscenity crime to see that same question, and it looks like they're just, I think I only found two. So there's soliciting an act of prostitution is a misdemeanor. And then also the existing promoting obscenity crime that's currently included. Everything else is a felony.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Katie. Ms. Moore, anything that you'd like to add on this front? Any comments on this bill?
Chairman, I don't think so, unless you have questions for me. Ms. Singleton did a great job of expressing our thoughts on this.
Okay. Any further questions for these folks? Okay, thank you very much. Once again, we reserve the right to call you back up. So is there anyone in the room who would like to come forward on working draft 56, the sex offender registration registerable offenses bill? Anybody who would like to come forward? Do we have anyone online, Eve? I think we probably do. Okay, thank you. If you could let him in, please. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanson. If you could restate your name just for the record and unmute and take it away.
Yes, hello, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Jason Hanson. Today I'm speaking on behalf of a group of citizens that are being unconstitutionally affected by Wyoming's current registration law. We're asking again that this committee change the reporting obligation of statute 6-2-316A-II, third degree sexual abuse of a minor, to the medium H tier, so as to be more in line with the stated purpose of Wyoming Sex Offender Registration Acts, being not to punish, but to facilitate law enforcement and the protection of children. I would like to thank the committee's members for their commitment to working towards changing these reporting obligations. You know, as said in last session, the LSO office did an amazing job looking into the treatment of the statute. It clearly shows that statute 6-2-316A-II is being imposed the maximum regulatory burden under Wyoming sex offender registry laws. This is a crime that has a victim range of 16 or 17. The actor must occupy a position of authority in relationship to the victim with intrusion. An offense that is considered a situational offense, meaning had the offender not occupied that position of authority, this wouldn't even be a crime in Wyoming. These offenders are required to currently register 4 times a year for life with no option for judicial review, and have registered 3 times this year since the committee began in April. This is despite several categorically worse first and second degree offenses against victims aged 13 through 15. They're being categorized medium H tier, only requiring them to register 2 times a year and able to ask for judicial review after 25 years. And these offenders have only been monitored once since April. There are at least 5 categorically worse first and second degree offenses, even comparable offenses where if the same offender had been in a position of authority and instead chosen a 13 through 15-year-old victim, they would have been categorized medium H and charged as a first degree sexual abuse of a minor. By this committee's own words, these offenders that are younger within the ages of this statute may be less severe. Yet those offenders ultimately are affected and register much longer than the older offenders in this statute. So an example would be older offenders would receive more time during sentencing and have a harder time convincing a judge to be released from duty to register. If you had a 20 or 30-year-old offender, they were given a sentence, let's say 2.5 years. They would be aged 23 to 33 by the time they were released. And if they registered until, let's say, the age of 80, that would be a registration time for that 20-year-old offender of 57 years and that 30-year-old offender of approximately 47 years. Whereas if a 50 or 40-year-old offender did the same crime, they'd probably get a twice as long sentence, let's say 5 years. That would mean that by the time they were released, that offender would be 45 or 55. And if they lived to be 80, that 45-year-old would be registered 35 years, and that 55-year-old would be registered 25 years. By requiring statute 6-2 316A to be placed in the severe J tier, Wyoming's current tiering system is at risk of being ruled arbitrary or irrational in nature and is clearly not within legislative intent of protecting children, as it incentivizes offenders for choosing younger victims. This statute was created and added as part of the 2007 rewriting of Wyoming sex offender registration laws in an effort to comply with the Adam Walsh Act and SORNA, which clearly and unambiguously defines a tier 3 sex offender which is the equivalent of Wyoming's J severe tier, as comparable to or more severe than a violent sexual offense or an abuse without consent or a victim under 13. As can be clearly seen in the memo from the LSO office, Wyoming has taken this hard line in every statute except statute 6-2 316A. Very clearly, that statute is neither violent, without consent, and the victims can only ever be 16 or 17. Nor does it fit within Wyoming's definition of a violent felony under statute 6-1-104. This low-level third-degree offense was placed into the severe J tier when House Bill 120 was enacted in 2007, and the sexual abuse of a minor statutes were added to the tiering policy. House Bill 120's stated purpose was to classify Wyoming sex offenses into 3 tiers based on severity, specifically stating at that time that offenders should be rated according to what they did. It's very clearly that the third degree offense should not be placed into the severe J category when had they just chosen a 13 through 15-year-old victim, they would be placed into the medium H category and charged with a first degree offense instead. When House Bill 20 was brought before the committee as a whole in 2007, they added the amendment, the sexual abuse of a minor statutes that were constructed in Senate File 104 to the Wyoming 3 tiers. I've listened to the transcripts of the committee as a whole, and a reading of the amendment to House Bill 120 from Senate File 104 was disposed of. That means it wasn't read in front of the whole committee. The LSO office was just asked to simply make offenses from Senate File 104 fit with House Bill 120's tiers. Nor was it ever discussed with the committee which sexual abuse of a minor crimes would be placed in which category. The committee as a whole was simply informed later which category or tier the LSO office placed each crime in. It was clearly a mistake to place a third degree offense in the severe J category, as clearly evidenced by the fact that multiple comparable offenses, first and second degree sexual abuse of a minor, were placed into the medium H tier. To classify Wyoming sex offenses this way, I can think of no bigger discrepancy or lack of conformity to Wyoming sex offender registration and the offenses registrable than to require those third degree offenses to register for life when, again, had they just chose younger victims, they would have been able to ask to get relief after 25 years. Today's bill, 24 LSO 56, stated purpose is to correct some discrepancies in the sex offender registration statute. And the bill's name is Sex Offender Registration Registerable Offenses. It falls well within the name and purpose of the bill 24 LSO 0056 to amend the reporting obligations unconstitutionally placed on statute 6-2 316 III, third degree sexual abuse of a minor. These offenders are not looking for a loophole. They're simply asking to be protected by Wyoming's constitutional rights. They're asking to be treated equally by Wyoming's laws. They're asking to be allowed rights to due process and free and access to state courts to address their injuries, to not be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment of being subjected to lifetime registration as a low-level offense, which Supreme Court of South Carolina recently ruled unconstitutional, citing Powell versus Keel 2021. If they had been looking for a loophole, these offenders would have just chosen younger victims so that they could ask for relief after 25 years. None of these offenders are denying the seriousness of their crime, nor the need to register for a period of time. They're simply imploring to be protected equally by Wyoming's laws, as is the right given by Wyoming and the U.S. Constitution. Rights which each and every one of you senators and representatives took a solemn oath to support, obey, and defend. It's time to correct this discrepancy in Wyoming's registration laws that for 16 years has been requiring these low-level third-degree offenders to register twice as often and never be allowed to ask for relief from duty to register, especially since had these offenders just chosen younger victims, they would have been able to ask for relief from duty after 25 years. You can no longer say that you are ignorant to the unconstitutional treatment of these citizens. I again implore this committee on behalf of these affected citizens to amend the reporting level of statute 6-2 316 III, third degree sexual abuse of a minor, to a more appropriate severity tier in today's bill, 24 LSO 56, so as to correct a huge lack of conformity or discrepancy in Wyoming's sex offender registration statute, and to be more in line with the legislators' intended purpose of classifying sex offenses into tiers based on their severity, as well as Wyoming Sex Offender Registry's stated purpose of not being to punish, but for the protection of children. Thank you.
Mr. Hanson, thank you. Very thorough. Appreciate your rundown. Committee, any questions for Mr. Hanson? Any questions? Okay, thank you, sir. We appreciate you weighing in.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? Eve, is there anyone else streaming in this morning who wants to testify? Okay, I'm going to close public testimony on this bill. Committee, what's your pleasure? Do I have a motion on the registrable offenses bill? Any motion? Going once.
Mr. Chairman, if we wanted to get to Mr. Henson's issue, we should move the bill and then change the bill. Can we do that?
Senator, thank you. So if are you moving the bill then?
I'm asking if we can reconstitute this bill to do what Mr. Henson wants.
My understanding is that we can. And Mr. Fuller, can you confirm that for me?
I think we can.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So if we were to move and consider this bill, we could make the correction that was requested by Mr. Hanson. Yes.
And we could eliminate what the bill was doing if we wanted to, kind of two different things, but I will move the bill.
Okay, Senator Case has moved the bill. Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Harrelson for discussion. So let's have some discussion on what would need to take place if we were going to address what Mr. Hanson indicated was a discrepancy in the bylaws or in the statutes.
And could we hear from our prosecutors and maybe Mr. Fuller?
Not to put you on the spot, Representative Oakley, but any thoughts about this bill and that change?
I'm probably, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I'm probably more ambivalent than, I mean, it really just comes down to a policy. Is that, do you think that offense is worthy of having lighter registration, requirements? We certainly have cases. I just got done with a case where the girl was 16 and the man was, I don't know, 50. And she very much feels that she was taken advantage of and it changed her life and that she's a victim of sex assault, if you will. So, the thing with this, when you're talking, it's a 16 to 17-year-old victim. They have to be 4 years older, the defendant. So that can be 22, where the more traditional, like where 16, 17 and 22, it maybe is. And then there's much bigger age differences that kind of has that. And this one, in addition, does have position of authority. I think the most common that you'll see with this is a teacher situation. So I guess the reality is from there, I don't know. Do we think it's something that we need to have less registration, that requirements, less stringent requirements for the lower tier? I guess that's just kind of an individual vote from there. And then I'll just say this quickly. I get off topic, but then I'm going to bring a motion to take those two other offenses off. But that's for another conversation.
Mr. Co-Chairman, then we'll go on down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I guess what I want to be clear on is if we have similar acts, but the victim is younger, they can get the 25-year opt-out. But if the victim is older, then it's lifetime reporting. I think that was the point I heard from Mr. Hansen that seemed inequitable. If Representative Oakley could comment on that.
So is that a correct read, Representative Oakley, in your opinion? Does the co-chairman kind of zero in on what was being described by the public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the distinction there is, and maybe I'd get some help on this, but that position of authority in that statute and the policy that was made at that point was that's sort of the enhancement. So does this statute warrant taking it down to what was it? So it's at J and it would go to H. Is that correct? And so, I mean, we can look at those, the H and J, and then basically that is, it's saying, okay, do you want it to go into this? I was thinking that 13 and 14 were always J's, but am I wrong? Is that it? Do you know that if we've got that there's a statute with a 13-year-old victim that is in H? Maybe we should change that.
Ms. Singleton, thank you for coming forward. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, there are a few from first and second that are H's versus J's. Mr. Hansen did testify that there was one that had younger victims in H versus J, and I'm not sure of why that was decided by the legislature in the past, maybe because it's an older offender that should have known better. Maybe it's the position of authority. I'm really not sure.
Mr. Chair,
ahead, Representative.
and I'm sorry, I should just look real quickly. And Mr. Fuller, and you guys might know this. I bet it's because it's not full sexual intrusion. This is a sexual intrusion crime, which is so full sex. I mean, I just say, and then there's others which are sexual contact, which could be like over the clothes, things like that. So we could look at that and probably get an answer from them. But my guess is if there's something that's the H registration that has the lower victim, it's sexual contact versus sexual intrusion. I bet you I'm right. Is that, Mr. Fuller?
Mr. Chairman,
can you, and then I'll go to Mr. Fuller. While you're looking, let's go to Mr. Fuller.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a quick scan. So I'm not sure if this is all of them. At least a couple of offenses I see in H that involve victims less than 13 involve solicitation or as has been mentioned, sexual contact instead of sexual intrusion. Mr. Chairman, the other thing I would note with the inclusion of 62316A2 in J, in that specific amendment that the legislature adopted to put it in J, all of the offenses in that amendment had a common thread, and that was sexual intrusion as an element of the offense. Mr. Chairman, my colleague has ably stated, where the federal act sets as a floor, but certainly it's the committee and the legislature's policy decision to decide where offenses should be in the Sex Offender Registration Act.
So, Mr. Fuller, the scary part of this is, and maybe I speak for Senator Case as well, I actually remember that amendment was made on the floor, and I believe it was brought by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee at that time. That's scary for all of you to know that I was back in 2007 listening in like that. So, Ms. Singleton, go ahead.
Thank you,
Further
Mr.
thoughts?
Chairman. To answer your other question, Representative Oakley, there is one that's in H, that's 62314, A Romanet 3, that is intrusion and position of authority. Now, certainly the age of the offender is different, as well as the age of the victim. And I believe that's what Mr. Hansen was comparing his to, like, why is the victim younger in this H offense when the victim for the J offense is 16 or 17? So I think that is what Mr. Hansen was referring to. Again, the complete policy decision, whether the committee believes that an older offender with a little bit older of a victim should be a J or an H, and certainly we're SORNA compliant in either of those categories, so it's within your discretion.
Ms. Singleton, thank you. That's helpful. Go ahead, Senator Case.
Well, a question possibly for Ms. Singleton, or our able staff prosecutors. The 4 years is very important, but could we make it an age range? And it seems to me that I remember a bill, like, say it's the victim is at least 4 years younger and not more than 10 years younger than the perpetrator or something like that. Basically get at the older actors is what I'm trying to do. So if you're 4 years on 17, that's 21. If it were 10 years, you'd be 27, I guess, but and someone older than that really should know better. Maybe that's the wrong number, 10, maybe 7, but
no, I see.
You see what I'm trying to do
I
here.
see where you're going, Senator, and
I think I like 7 years better than 10 years.
I'd be interested in reactions, Ms. Singleton. Even though you just heard it, what's your thoughts on?
Mr. Chairman, my initial thought was you could put some sort of limitation or exception like we put with felonious restraint and false imprisonment. So this crime and the offender has to be 7 years older or something like that. Certainly, I think you could do something like that.
So a couple things in my mind, committee. I don't want any of our statutes to be inconsistent or punitive in a bad way just because we haven't done our due diligence, even though maybe I speak for everyone on the panel. This is a really tough area in public policy. None of us like to go there. I spent a long time reading through all the material provided by our staff, which was really well done, but my goodness, there's a lot of statutes here. And I'm looking at our two prosecutors, they know there's a lot of statutes there, but I don't want any inconsistencies. Even if it's tough for us to bring something, I'd like to make sure that if we need to make it right, then we ought to make it right. That's the deal. So further comments on what the senator just brought up? Is there a flavor for us to maybe narrow that field a little bit, or is any further comments on that?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Jen.
I'm a little uncomfortable because I'd like to get to this, what appears like a discrepancy problem. But I'm not sure that we should hijack this particular bill for that project. I don't know if we need to, I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with doing that, you know, that we're gonna set aside the purpose of this to address something that we haven't gotten into the full understanding of. I think we do need to address it. I'd like to see it, but I'm uncomfortable hijacking one bill to address something that maybe we don't have a full understanding of.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I
Go
could,
ahead, Senator
may I
Case.
respond? So in the interim, you have more license to do things. You're not restricted overly. And we did hear from this individual at I guess it was the first meeting. I can't remember which meeting, but the last meeting. And certainly I can remember even Representative Oakley talking about, you know, the difficulties in this area. So I'm kind of under the thing that people's lives are affected by the words on these pages and go in the green books. And if we have the opportunity to fix something that needs to be fixed, we're really not doing our job unless we take that opportunity. So I would hope we would at least discuss an amendment to change this registration requirement for this particular class. I would like to limit it to the situation where it's a range between 4 and 7 years. And I think that catches younger males who, you know, that's in the stupid world still. And older males, definitely, I don't want to cut any slack on. So that's where I'm at, and I would offer that amendment.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think it's up to you. You can decide on whether you want to, I think there are two amendments basically, or two conceptual ideas about what we want to do. I think some folks want to vote to take out some of these other things that we started off doing that are in print. And then I think it's a separate amendment to say, let's address Mr. Hansen's concerns. And so you could have your cake and eat it too, if you wanted, or you could, you know, kill both amendments and try to move the bill forward as it is. So I don't think we have to necessarily hijack it in some people's minds. I think it just depends on how you vote on the amendments.
Representative, thank you for that. And yes, I think sex offender registration, registerable offenses, I think the consideration on the floor right now is very appropriate for this bill. And there's been some indication that we'll take up the other two provisions in the bill too. Representative Oakley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I'm most interested in, as far as this specific, anyway, Ms. Singleton said in 62314, which is entitled sexual abuse of a minor in the first degree, and A3 is one that says being 18 years of age or older, the actor inflicts sexual intrusion on a victim who's less than 16, so 15 or younger, and the actor occupies a position of authority. That is an H, so the lesser registerable H, if and then it specifically says if the victim was at least 14, so it's not 13 or less, but so then you're 14 or older, then it's an H offense instead of a J. So if we wanted to do parity, I guess to me, the simplest thing that we could do is switch it is, and this is, and then so 62316 that we're referring to, A2 is sex abuse of minor in the third degree. They end up being somewhat similar, but would be to the parity to me would be to switch that to an H, and we heard that we're still, that would still be in SORNA compliance. I think that's the easiest fix. If the policy decision is that that's what you want to make, is that those two statutes are similar and it shouldn't be a J offense, it should be an H offense. To me, that would be the easy fix. and then again, that's for every committee member, of course, then to decide if that's what you think is appropriate and fair. If you think that's I'm just suggesting that as an easy way of doing this. They do have Senator Case. I don't know if there's any specific, I don't know that this one, but we could do your, but like in your 7 years or 10 years or whatever we wanted to do, because the 62304A3 now does say if the victim was at least 14 years of age. So under H, you say, you say that statute, you switch it from J to H, and then you say if the actor was 8 years or more older, something like that, and just switch it to H. That's how we would get there, I think, if that's what we want to do.
So, thank you, Representative Oakley. That's helpful. And I think we're honing in on what some of us would like to get to. We actually had a motion made by the senator, and Senator Case, would you be willing to restate if you want to make a motion?
Can I get Representative Oakley to do it for me? And I'll adopt it.
We could, yeah, we could certainly do that. Representative Oakley, would you be willing to take a stab at what you just outlined?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it would be, the motion then would be to add into the language to change 62316A2 from being a J offense. So it would be removed from there, it'd be added to H. And then I think so it would say for an offender convicted of a violation of Wyoming statute 62316A2, and if the actor was, give me your number.
No more than 7 years older.
Was 7 years or more.
Yeah.
7 years.
Well, how about
7
making
years
it 8?
older or more?
How about making it 8? It's a matter, it doesn't matter. 8 years or more.
8 it is, so that would be the motion, transferring it from J to H with the caveat.
Is it, and just to be clear, I love what she's doing. Would it still exist under the other one if the difference without the language about?
I believe so, and it would mimic what is done already in statute. So,
Because I don't want to remove it if there's a bigger age.
if there's the
discrepancy.
bigger, and that, again, that's already LSO could copy, because the 6.2. Am I reading that right? It can-
Brian real quick.
Brian's got his
I've
mouth
been
twisted
holding-
up. I know he knows the answer.
Am I messing this up, Mr. Fuller?
So
Mr. Fuller, I've been holding you in reserve.
Yeah.
So can you come into the game real quick here?
Yeah, Mr.
That'd be
Chairman.
great.
Yeah.
We'll pass you the ball.
I was not clear on if language was being stricken from J or not. That's, I think, the first question. Mr. Chairman, if you're adding language about specified years, I think you want to be careful to make sure that some group of persons who is not convicted of this offense end up not having to register at all. And I think is the way it's been described, that may happen. So if the actor was less than 8 years older than the victim, where it stands, I think that person would not have to register. So Mr. Chairman, if the intent is to have a younger actor register under the less restrictive tier, then H should be 62316A2 if the actor was not more than 8 years older than the victim. And then if the intent is to keep older actors under the more severe registration tier, then J should read 62316A2 if the actor was not less than 8 years older than the victim.
Right.
Isn't that the motion you intended to make, Senator? That's what I thought I heard you say.
Mr. Fuller fumbling around to get there.
Is there a second for that one? Seconded by Representative Harrelson. Committee, thanks for the time on that. I think that is has been worth the consideration. So now we do have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Does everyone understand where we landed with this? Okay, all right. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Fuller, for your help on that. Now, we're back on the bill and further considerations. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to strike, I think I had it written 62202, but felonious restraint and false imprisonment from the bill.
What page?
There's no code.
And who was the second on that? Senator Chase seconded that. So Representative Oakley, go ahead.
For discussion, and I know that there's some people who disagree with this, but I just mentally cannot get there. That it just seems to cast too wide of a net. I mean, neither of those statutes have a sex component at all. Now, that doesn't mean that something in the case might not have pointed towards that. But I don't think we cast that wide of a net. I mean, when felonious restraint, false imprisonment's a misdemeanor and doesn't have a sex component. I just can't get there that should be on the sex offender registry. Logically, I've been trying to see if somebody could convince me. I haven't heard it. So that's my motion.
Okay, thank you, Representative, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I agree. When I first read this bill draft, the example popped into my mind of a store security officer who falsely accuses someone of shoplifting, detains them in the office, falsely imprisons them over a shoplifting thing. The criminal charge would be false imprisonment, right? If this was an unlawful thing, this individual, but there's nothing sexual at all there. And then to tell that store security guard who's convicted of false imprisonment that he has to be on the registry, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so I think we cast a broad net here, but we're getting some dolphins with the tuna.
Well, that clarifies it for me. Any further discussion on the proposed amendment by Representative Oakley? Anything else? All in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. That amendment carries. And we are back on what was the bill before, which is not what it used to be. Are you ready for the roll call? Roll call on 56, please.
Senator Case,
Aye.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler, Representative Chestick,
Aye.
Representative Craigo,
Aye.
Representative Haroldson,
Aye.
Representative Jennings, Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez Williams,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Washit,
Aye.
Chairman Langdon,
Aye.
14-9.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Working draft 56 has passed the committee as amended, and we'll move on to the session. Committee, that takes us to the lunch hour, and as you've seen on your agenda, the committee will be invited out to the Law Enforcement Academy for a tour out there. I hope you can all make it. I look forward to that, and then we will come back. I want to alert folks that we might get back before the 2:30 hour. We may start slightly sooner than that. So be aware of that. Don't get caught late. And so we are at an intermission for lunch.